Oh.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. It's Monday, yeah, and it's snowing up in Vermont, but I guess that could be a sort of redundancy. I'm happy to be here, happy to be back with you. I don't know about you, but I was troubled by the Fani Willis, and you notice how I said Fani, not Fanny. I'm trying to give her the respect to which she's due. Why? Because
Nanny
her
for
father.
Fanny, 5 Fanny, Nanny.
I don't want to get in trouble with her dad. Her dad is a former gun-toting member of the Black Panthers who managed to avoid serious criminal consequences, then became a criminal defense lawyer, and then a municipal judge. And he stands in Fani's corner. Why, he explained to the judge, "I don't mean to be a racist, sir, but it's a black thing. We like to keep a lot of mad cash around the house because you just never know when you're going to need it." Maybe. But while we were talking about her and her incredible testimony last week, Mike flashed on the screen a book that was used to impeach Nathan Wade. Find Me the Votes, a hard-charging Georgia prosecutor, blah, 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 by Michael Isikoff and another man. I have a lot of confidence in Isikoff's reporting. So I went ahead and read the book over the weekend. I wanted to understand what the hell is going on in Georgia, and I wanted to understand the prosecution a little better. And I recommend that all of you read the book. It's not that long, 300 pages or so. You can knock it off in an afternoon or two. And it's a little bit of hagiography. In other words, he's made a saint of her. I wonder if his account of her would be quite as glowing after Friday's testimony, or whether he would just sort of dismiss it as irrelevant. What the book accounts for is her determination, her rise as a prosecutor, her coming up through the ranks in the Georgia District Attorney's office, then her turning on her mentor when her mentor began to have problems with charges that he was heating the sheets with employees, something Fani promised she'd never do in an interview. Well, history repeats itself, and there she is heating the couch springs anyhow, or exercising the couch springs with Nathan Wade, and then I think lying about it on the witness stand in Georgia. Do I think the judge who is presiding over her disqualification case will disqualify her? No, absolutely not. I don't think he's got the stones or the balls to do so. And he could say that whatever ethical lapses, whatever misjudgments she had by carrying on with one of her employees on the public dime, that doesn't rebound to Mr. Trump's detriment. It doesn't prejudice him, and therefore the standard for disqualification raised by a defendant has not been met. But in terms of the appearance of impropriety and the stink factor, it's there. But what's truly fascinating about Isikoff's book is the questions that he doesn't ask, and then the honesty that he had to say he's not asking them. And what am I talking about? When you read an account of Georgia's RICO prosecution of Trump and others, what you realize is the Florida RICO statute is incredibly open-ended. Isikoff does a decent job, but one index of it's being open-ended, he says, is the co-defendants don't even have to know one another in Georgia. They don't have to know one another in federal law as well. All there has to be is in a meeting of the minds to engage in some joint criminal enterprise. Georgia's RICO statute is broader than the federal RICO statute in that the definition of enterprise is more sweeping. So Fani caught national attention by prosecuting Georgia school teachers for fudging test scores on standardized tests after the No Child Left Behind federal set of standards for educational institutions was enacted. Why did teachers do that? They got bonuses and raises depending on the overall performance of their of their students. And so Fani pressed that prosecution and got convictions. She's also a tough law and order prosecutor and breaks with the left on that. George Soros and his team interviewed her as a potential source of funding when she ran for office, I believe in 2020, and they took a pass on her. They didn't like her answers. All of those are in the plus column for Isikoff. But she, what Isikoff doesn't ask.
Also very convenient reporting in terms of what the known criticism was of her at the time that the book was published. So just throwing it out there.
No, it's fawning. I mean, it's not critical. It is, it's a good puff piece. I'm sure that Willis likes it, and if she has ambitions for higher office, she'll be passing this book out with the afterword that has to be written after last week's hearing at future events. But what Isikoff doesn't do, and I thank Julian Toll from Down Under, Toll notes that Isikoff was an infamous peddler of the Russian Trump collusion debacle. Isikoff is to the left. That's fine. You got to be, that there's a spectrum for some reason. I've always said, read all the way along the spectrum. There may be some truth out there somewhere that you can find. But what Isikoff, what's dizzying in the Isikoff book is the number of times that people came up with bizarre theories about campaign fraud, and everybody jumped on them. Everybody on the Trump team jumped on them, and massive amounts of energy were devoted to pursuing these themes, even when they didn't have evidentiary support. And he never stops to ask, why would people do this? Obviously Trump's motive for doing this is clear. He wants to stay in office. But is it so simple to say that those around him were simply toadies who wanted what he had to offer? Or isn't there a broader social phenomena that we need to account for? What Mike and I here on Law and Legitimacy call a legitimation crisis. Isikoff never addresses that, but near the end of his book, he writes the following. And frankly, this is the redeeming feature of the book. Historians and political scientists will struggle for years to explain the mystical hold Trump seems to have on his voters, but unquestionably, a big part of it is his cunning ability to capitalize on the distrust that many of them have, in some cases for entirely legitimate reasons, for the ex-president's many targets: the FBI, the Justice Department, the courts, the press, which was labeled from the outset of the presidency the enemy of the people. And that is the bingo moment. That is the moment that Isikoff showed me that whatever ideological shortcomings he has, whatever axe to grind, however far his head may be up the hindquarters of Fani Willis, he nonetheless has his eyes open, and he sees out there in the marketplace of ideas a hunger for something. And it's that hunger that makes Trump possible. And so again, I repeat the question that we've asked almost daily or almost weekly rather on this podcast. What is it about the politics of our time that makes the extremes that we're seeing, the extremism that we're experiencing, seem appropriate? And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I struggle with it, whether it's the rise of big tech, whether it's changing standards of immigration, whether it's the bottom falling out of pluralism, whether it's all of the above. I've yet to read a complete and compelling account of the malaise of our time. And I'm making an appeal to you readers and listeners out there. If you've read a decent account of the crisis, I'll call it the spiritual, the socio-political crisis that defines our moment, tell us about it. I'll read it. Mike tossed Find Me the Votes up on the screen Friday afternoon. By yesterday afternoon, done. Checked it off. It was on the reading list. Also on the reading list this weekend, I hate to admit it, it's a book I've started twice and now 3 times, and I've never finished it. I'll finish it this time. William Shire's Rise and Fall of the Nazis. And it starts with a discussion of the turmoil in Germany when the Weimar Republic collapsed at the end of the First World War, and the number of factions that arose and the violence between the factions as political parties strove for a sense of vision. They tried to create order out of chaos. I think we're at a sort of Weimar moment in the United States right now where there is no cohesion, and the result is there's a struggle to grasp a center. There's a struggle to create a sense of meaning. And what you're seeing in our politics right now are signs of that struggle. And that is the defining character of our time.
Question for you. So I originally brought up Find Me the Votes as a book based on watching the examination of Nathan Wade.
Cross-examination, yeah.
And in particular, his ignorance as to the portion of the book in which Isikoff interviews Fani, and she discusses her financial condition, the poor nature thereof prior to her election. Did you come across that section, and what did you glean, if so?
Yeah, it wasn't the cross examiner took some liberties with what was written. Certainly, Fani is not awash in cash, and certainly she struggled to pay her bills. But there's no indication of the book of her having a tax lien, for example. I'm still trying to confirm that that's the case. I didn't watch her testimony. Her dad did talk about black folks hoarding cash. But there doesn't seem to be any substance to the fact that she's motivated by venal financial motives. Anger and ambition aplenty, she's got enough, I'd say, in spades, but I'd be accused of being racially insensitive. I said it anyhow, make the accusation. Frankly, I don't give a feces. But no, there wasn't much there, Mike.
Okay. Mari said still calling her Fani. Yes, I mean,
Okay, Fani. I'll slip. If I give her what she wants, she's Fani. If I report what I see, what else can she be but Fani? And I took some criticism online in the Twitter world. I await the day when you, as a white male, will realize how blah 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 blah. And let me tell you something. If your way of preaching at me, if your premise is that as a white male, I need to, I won't even get to the end of the sentence before what I will have done is tuned you out. Trump, he gets popped. Engoren's judgment, $355 million. No surprise, that's what Letitia James wanted. But it remains a troubling judgment. That Engoren and Trump were oil and water. Well, everybody could see that from afar. The proceedings were televised, after all. But didn't the banks testify that they didn't lose any money? Didn't the banks testify that Trump's assets were performing well for the banks? Didn't the banks testify that they'd offer him loans yet again? Wasn't there testimony that it's common to under and overvalue real estate appraisals? Wasn't there testimony that the Trump organization warned the bank to do their own due diligence? So $355 million for what?
Well, so there's even something more fundamental than that, Norm. This case should have been before a business court, period, right?
I don't know what that is. What's a business court?
Well, so in civil court, in the civil court system, there's often just the routine district courts that deal with matters from negligence to civil torts, breaches of contract, etc. However, when there are complex issues revolving around real estate, finance, etc., there is a specialized system of courts that are established state to state that allow for judges with a certain subject matter competency. In this case, it would be real estate, finance, banking laws, securities, etc., to actually sit and preside over suits involving, the government and or to private parties, and also adjudicate those with that, from beyond the presence of a jury, if that's the case, or with the presence of a jury in either case. This case, I believe, was attempted to be removed into a business court, and that was absolutely subverted early on in the process. And that's also why the judgment, the default judgment against Trump, right? The early finding that he was in fact responsible for some amount of malfeasance in running his businesses is so egregious in context, right? Because this draws really key similarities to the Alex Jones defamation judgment, the $1.6 billion judgment.
1.5.
Yeah, sorry, pardon me. That crazy, excessive, exorbitant judgment against Jones was built on the fact that there was no factual presentation for a jury. He was presumed responsible, right? He was presumed to be the responsible party based on a default judgment earlier on in the proceedings. That's very similar to what happened here. And so even with the testifying by these lenders and bankers and real estate professionals, et cetera, that Trump had his name alone was good enough to underwrite these loans. Trump went on after the fact in front of, I believe it was when he was in Michigan, to talk about the fact that he didn't really even need these loans. These banks were asking him to take these loans, that he was valuable enough and that nobody ever had any complaints. Yet the problem with all of that is that you're really only building on top of a mechanism to mitigate whatever damages calculation Engoren had already set about to make by holding him responsible early enough in the process, which is why I brought up the idea of sort of a fundamental issue here is that, you and I talked about this in earlier streams, and many people have talked about this, the sheer incompetence of Engoren on the subject of real estate finance, banking, lending cycles, these sorts of things, valuation of real properties, commercial, residential, et cetera. It just escapes him, right? He has no knowledge of these things or no functional knowledge, or if he does, he's playing the fool quite well. Either way, Trump is severely prejudiced by this. And
Well,
the fact that
yeah.
you have other people who were in these private business relationships with him who have no qualms, nothing to complain about, who are responsible for securing the collateral that they need to underwrite the loan, who are responsible for actually being able to value these things based on his financial statement and their own due diligence. These are sophisticated parties. Why is the government trying to intercede between private contracts between sophisticated parties?
I'm listening to you. I still want to challenge the premise that you need a special court, a business court. For example, I practice primarily in a small jurisdiction, Connecticut. We don't have such things, which is why I was puzzled when you mentioned it. We do have what's called a complex litigation docket, where cases that have extraordinary complexity get parked, like Alex Jones's. Of course, the danger in cases like that is that the umpire thinks that people came to the event to watch him or her call balls and strikes, and they take control of the litigation. We saw the consequences in Alex Jones's case. I argued his appeal in the appellate court week before last, and I'm optimistic that we'll get some relief there, if not a new trial. In the Engoren case, Mike, I didn't follow the case obsessively. I'd read a few stories about it each week, and I'm not sure that special expertise is necessary. I mean, the facts that I recited at the beginning of the segment on Trump, I think, are facts that are well known and well established on even a cursory recitation of the record.
I don't disagree, Norm. This is the first time I've brought this up, but I don't disagree. I just think I'm looking at this verdict of in excess of $350 million, and I'm thinking, why was something with the potential ramifications and sizable figures like this trusted to somebody like Engoren?
Well, because it was a court trial. It was equitable relief. They wanted disgorgement, and apparently
for what?
I get that, and that's my next question. So, how much you mentioned damages? Are these fines or damages? Compensatory.
He's being fined, but that's my issue. Is that there is the entirety of the case is set upon these transgressions against other private parties, other banks. There is no complainant other than the state.
So let's do a quick pivot and give credit to John Turley, the Georgetown law professor, or George Washington, who does a column each week, I think, in the Washington Post on the Capitol Hill. He points out that under Supreme Court precedent, BMW v. Gore, this case may be vulnerable on appeal, and here's why. BMW v. Gore set limits on punitive damages that a finder of fact could impose. In effect, on fines, the Eighth Amendment, for example, prohibits excessive fines. In BMW versus Gore, a plaintiff said, hey, a BMW dealer lied to me. They said I had, low mileage on the car. In fact, they messed with the odometer. I was damaged. Give me punitive damages. They got a nominal compensatory damages award. In other words, their actual out-of-pocket losses were slight. But their lawyers argued that to send a message to car dealers everywhere, an enormous punitive damage award was necessary. And they got one. I don't remember the exact number. But the United States Supreme Court said that the disproportion between the punitive awards and the compensatory damages was so vast as to offend due process. That due process requires that persons have some notice and opportunity to be heard, some inkling that things can go so catastrophically wrong. In the case of Letitia James in the state of New York versus Donald Trump, there was no ratio because there was no harm. And on a threshold of no compensatory damages, where the banks didn't lose money, they wanted his business, a default enters, and then a judge decides to give New York a $355 million fine. It's also a fine for nothing.
Yeah, and also barring him from doing business in the state of New York as well, which is something we're focused so much on, this sort of retroactive figure that they, it just materialized out of thin air. But we're also saying to Trump that he's not allowed to do business in one of the most valuable markets in the world.
Well, keep an eye on this case. I think that there's going to be tremendous appellate opportunities for this case. I envy the appellate lawyers that Trump will have. think this case could end up in the front of the United States Supreme Court on an excessive fines claim. Hey,
before we move on, we've got some stuff on Rumble. A couple questions I just want to address before we leave the Willis, Georgia stuff. James JK asks, anyone know if there's anything more to come? Read the judge interviewing that final witness. Bradley, was it? And Norm, something that occurred late in the day on Friday is that one of the attorneys, I think it was Attorney Cross, essentially, like, I guess, threw a stake through the heart of their own case by outing that Bradley, one of Wade's partners, apparently had allegations of sexual misconduct in the office levied against him, and that being the basis for him leaving the partnership. And so the big issue that has really failed from the defense side in this evidentiary hearing is these proffers of attorney-client privilege on, from Wade, from Bradley, from anybody within that sphere, right? Wade is saying that Bradley was his attorney for his divorce proceedings, and the judge has just been very charitable in allowing this attorney-client privilege to just blanket everything and to preclude certain questions from being answered. And of course, the state's attorneys have been really active in trying to create and maintain this as an issue. But as far as what comes next, it's clear that based on this Bradley revelation, whether true or not, there is some level of reduction in the attorney-client privilege as it relates to the prior testimony. And there's going to be an in-camera review of a lot of this information forthcoming. So I think at the end of the hearing on Friday, where it was left, is that the judge is going to schedule, I guess, some sort of in-camera hearing, but then they will be back in court within the next couple of weeks. So I'm not sure how quickly this is going to move, but for sure in Trump's interest, the longer this, irrespective of the outcome here, the more that this unravels and unspools, the better for him in terms of the timing.
So I'm an absolutist on the attorney-client privilege. And my view is, if you come to me as your client and place your future in my hands and say, what can I do? I say, what have you done? And then we reason together. And my responsibility is to determine from you what your interests are and to advise you on how best to advance them within the shadow of what the law offers. Your communications with me are nobody's business. There are exceptions to the attorney-client privilege, which is a common law rule. And it's the so-called crime fraud exception,
which is here, which is being
but there's no crime.
Well, no. So again, I think attentiveness to the testimony of the hearings is, so yes, the exceptions have been brought up, but the relationships and the dual nature of these relationships, personal and professional, as between Wade and Bradley in particular, are under the microscope here. What truly is encompassed by the attorney-client privilege? When did it apply? To what extent was there an attorney-client privilege? And how is it that we can just allow an attorney-client privilege, a somewhat vague, with a vague starting point on a matter related to divorce proceedings, when you've been partners in law for a while, you've got all sorts of personal relationships and text messages, third-party text messages. There's all sorts of stuff here, Norm, that make it far from sort of a bright line analysis of whether you're an absolutist or not, because I tend to agree with you. We're both attorneys, and we both want the best for all of our clients. In this case, however, it's not obvious that the attorney-client privilege means anything whatsoever if it's being applied in this way.
Well, so look, it's one thing to say I have a partner and he left the firm because he couldn't keep his hands off the clients. And it's another thing to say, and he also got divorced. And when we talked about the matters in the firm and how that affected his divorce and his strategy in the divorce case, that might be cloaked in the privilege. To the degree that there were independent pieces of information, that might not be cloaked in the privilege, but then it has to become relevant. And so what's relevant in this case is whether, I think, Fani, call her what you will, was receiving benefit from the appointment of Wade. It's not relevant that Wade was fucking around with everything that moved on a pair of high heels. He can be as much of a dog as he wants. It just doesn't really shed light on that, except unless he denied it. Oh, and if he was stupid enough to get on the stand and say, I'd never never mess around with a woman who wasn't my wife. Well, bing, 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 bing. You've opened the door. And even a first-year trial lawyer would counsel his client on how to avoid answering that question in that way. So I think those are the lines the court's going to have to thread.
Well, you've already said enough at the beginning of this by saying that you don't think the judge has the stones to do what's necessary.
I don't think he does.
And I agree with you based on what I'm watching. It just seems like I just like kind of taking it as it comes and just letting, he's kind of just being pushed around. And until something as striking as the revelation that, that the state's side is going to put into question, right, the departure of one of the key witnesses from the firm, with no obvious reason for doing so. There was no obvious reason for her probing around that. Except
it was amateur hour at the Bijou. I mean, stick to your knitting, folks. Fani didn't do herself any favors. I think she and Trump deserve one another. When the judge gives Fani a pass, she's going to be able to stand up like Donald Trump said and say, I can stick my hand down a man's crotch and ain't nothing nobody going to do to me about it. That's sort of like when Trump boasted about being able to grab a star by the pussy. But I digress. Hey, let's talk about what today is. It's President's Day. And are you in the office today, Mike?
I'm always in the office.
Well, my office is closed today, and most of us have a holiday. But I think there was a fascinating column. I think it was in the Los Angeles Times. I bring it to everybody's attention. Dump President's Day. Election Day is a better way to honor American democracy. I can't help but agree with that. I mean, I was kind of fussing and fuming over the weekend. We're a republic. We talk about government by the people, for the people, of the people. We give our presidents limited power, and then we give everybody a day off so that we can honor these non-divine monarchs. I think a better way to call attention to our fundamental values would be to give everybody Election Day off. The second Tuesday or the first Tuesday or the second, whatever it is, first Tuesday in November, that is a day all Americans have off. We're going to close the courts. We're going to shut down government service, and we're going to require people to cast their votes that day. And we're going to make it very difficult, maybe almost impossible, to get an absentee ballot. My view is if you're out of the country and can't vote, well, you chose to be out of the country and can't vote. If we want to say voting is important, then pretend it is. If we want to talk about the Capitol as the shrine of democracy and what goes on there in January 6th in terms of the peaceful transition of power being a sacred tradition, then let's treat it as such. And let's say that on the day we choose our president, people have to go to their polling place. They have to present identification that shows who they say they are, and they have to cast their ballot in person that day, and that ballot has to be counted the next morning. I think so much of what happened by the next morning, I should say, so much of what's happened since 2020 and the wild conspiracy theorizing and the great crisis in legitimacy is that there's a tremendous incentive that political parties and individuals have to manipulate votes. And to the degree the voting process is not transparent, to the degree we've got sacks of ballots being handed around and it takes days to count, and reported estimates of the turnout or the votes at polling places differ by the hour, of course people are going to wonder. So let's make this into a national holiday. Let's get rid of President's Day, and have the day off on the first Tuesday in November. And if you want to vote, show up and vote.
So Junior says, I propose that Bud Light drinkers be excluded from voting. And I just want to use this opportunity to say exactly my point. Exactly my point. Thank you for finally having a revelation that you don't want Republicans to win anything. Anyway.
Junior, we love you, but we question whether both of your oars are in the water on a consistent basis, noting, for among other reasons, that you are from the West Coast, which means you're getting up at 5 a.m. to listen to us. Now, not all people who get up at 5 a.m. to listen to us have issues. Some are extremely insightful, like Dawn McNeil and I think Maury. But Junior, all this stuff about Bud Light, this one's for you, pal. Go crack a few, call us in the morning, take a couple, end it all if the pain of living is too much, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Yeah, look, Imperius asks a really easy question right here with no time left on the clock. So I'm just going to put this here, and we're not even going to attempt to get at that. Real question is why democracy is better than the divine right of kings. And Junior,
Well,
you guys are well worth 5 a.m. So look at that, redeeming. Thank you, Junior.
Ah!
And I'll say
ain't nothing but a hound dog.
our free our Friday stream as well. We added probably 100 subscribers over the weekend based on our Friday stream alone. Not sure what vein it hit, but it's doing fairly well. So if you want to go back and make sure you left a like on that. Share it again. We'll see if we can't get it to like 10,000 views. That'd be great.
Yeah, or those could be people who came to the live stream looking for the newsletter. Did we ever get last week's newsletter published?
Today it is going to be combined into this week's, and so it'll publish today at 9 a.m. It's already scheduled. I don't have to do anything else. It's
okay,
already
so it's not like I'm writing these things in vain, right? Okay,
absolutely not. I would never let you do that, Norm.
All right. Thank you very much. Hey, folks, well, I guess we'll stop abruptly today. We promise to take no more than a half an hour of your time each day. And we always break the promise by taking a little bit more. But we give you talking points for the day and a sensible middle ground to cut through the ideological divide that defines our times. We encourage you to storm the water coolers and to go up there and challenge assumptions on both the right and left and to use your common sense and to say to folks, hey, wait a minute. What does this have to do with the water I'm drinking right now? There are a lot of crazy ideas out there. Who knows what's going on in the world at large? Tomorrow, we promise to give you an explanation as to why the immigration crisis in the United States is perceived to be as gray as it is right now. There's an underlying reality to it, and there's an overriding ideological context that you'll only hear about here. So come back tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. Pacific time, 8 a.m. Eastern time, and I don't know what it'll be, Mountain time, somewhere in between the two, and we'll talk to you then. Mike, how do people find us?
You can find us on YouTube at LawPod Daily. You can find us on X at LawPod Daily, and also on Rumble if you're fighting for the scraps over there at Law and Legitimacy. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, wherever you find premium podcasts. Please leave us 5 stars and a nice comment, or leave us alone. Norm, I will see you tomorrow morning.
And as to that question, Imperious, I've got a reading assignment for you. We all know about John Locke's second treatise of government, but I'm willing to bet you've never read his first treatise. Read his takedown of Robert Filmer's Patriarcha in the first treatise of government, and then let's talk.
AMF, yo.
AMF.
See y'all.